Today I'd like to begin a new series for this season of Lent leading up to our celebration of Easter. I've called it CROSSwalk, and really trying to look at some of those moments in Jesus' ministry in those final days with His betrayal, His suffering, His death, and obviously on Easter Sunday, His resurrection. But particularly looking at them in terms of what they teach us about how we deal with some of the issues, some of the stuff that comes up in our lives. And today, to get us started on that crosswalk journey, I want to look at a place in where Jesus settles once and for all a key decision in His ministry. And I'd like to invite you to turn with me in your Bibles, if you have them today, to the book of Matthew. Matthew 26, as we look at a moment when Jesus gathers His disciples with Him in the Garden of Gethsemane. And we learn from His example there about how we approach some of those key decision points in our lives. We read there in Matthew chapter 26, beginning at verse 36. Then Jesus went with His disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and He said to them, "Sit here, while I go over there and pray." And He took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with Him, and He began to be sorrowful and troubled. And then He said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." And going a little farther, He fell with His face to the ground, and He prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will." And then He returned to His disciples and found them sleeping. "Could you men not keep watch with me for 1 hour?" He asked Peter. "Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the body is weak." He went away a second time and prayed, "My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done." And when He came back, He again found them sleeping, because their eyes were heavy. So He left them and went away once more and prayed the third time, saying the same thing. And then He returned to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour is near, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." Would you pray with me? Have thine own way, Lord. Have thine own way. Thou art the potter, and we are the clay. In Christ's name, amen. There are those moments in life when we're faced with a truly significant decision. I call them crossroads moments. Those places where the decision that we make has an impact somehow on eternity. It affects our life long-term or forever. And we make a lot of decisions every day, don't we, that really don't have those kind of significant implications. I'm guessing that some of you this morning didn't wrestle with the idea of whether or not you should brush your teeth. You didn't wake up this morning and think, maybe I ought to think about or pray about whether or not God would have me to brush my teeth today. I guess the truth is, if you did or didn't brush your teeth this morning, it probably isn't going to have a huge impact on your eternity. It may have an impact on the friends that are willing to sit around the table with you today, but it's not going to impact long-term eternity for you. The decision this morning about what shoes you were going to wear, what clothes you would put on, probably aren't going to impact your eternity. Now, some of you might take issue with how important that decision is, but it's not a crossroads kind of moment. But there come those, don't there? There come those moments in our life where we're really wrestling with a significant decision that will have an impact on our eternity. Our decision whether or not we're going to follow Christ, a decision on who we're going to commit our life to in marriage. Sometimes a decision on a job or a vocation can have those kinds of implications, where we're going to live, whether or not we're going to do the right thing in a situation where doing the wrong thing may mean sacrifice, may mean we lose something important to us, but whether or not we're going to do the right thing. Those are the kind of moments I want us to consider this morning. Those crossroad kind of moments where we stand at a point of decision and we have to make a choice, and the result of that choice will impact eternity for us. Now, I think we find a lot of help in a moment like that from looking at one of those kind of moments in the life of Jesus. We read about it a few moments ago in the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus really is at a crossroad moment in his ministry. He is going to settle in this moment a decision that will impact eternity, not only for him, but will impact eternity in terms of where you and I stand as well. And I think we can learn a little something about the kind of decision that Jesus has to make there. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, I wonder, in what ways is this? How do we know that this moment in the Garden of Gethsemane really is one of those difficult crossroad kind of moments for Jesus? And I think the metaphor fits here because we read there in verses 37 and 38 that Jesus took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. And he said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Now notice the phrases that Jesus uses there, and that Matthew uses even to describe Jesus. He says there that Jesus was sorrowful and troubled. That word sorrowful is a word that connotes a very deep state of grief. If you think of those moments in your life where you felt so grieved in your spirit, and maybe it was grief at the loss of a loved one, but so grieved in your spirit that you couldn't help but just begin to weep. You couldn't help but feel that weight in your chest. I think for me, some of those moments have come in funerals for loved ones where I experienced that overwhelming sense of grief at the fact that they were no longer here. And while I'm not an emotionally expressive person much of the time, there were those moments where I couldn't help but just begin to pour my heart out in tears. Or another moment in my life where one of my great dreams had died. It really was an experience of grief and something that I had worked so hard for, something that I had poured myself into, had been taken away. And I remember sitting at the table in my kitchen that night and just feeling so moved in the depth of who I was and just weeping, not just a tear here or there, but just that just crying out from the depth of your being. And that's the kind of phrasing that Matthew uses here to help us understand the circumstances that Jesus was in here. Jesus was feeling that level of grief. It's really that description. Jesus says to his disciples here, right? I feel this sorrow to the point of death. It is an overwhelming sense of grief that is so strong it could kill you. So when Jesus comes to this moment that he's going to settle this issue in his heart, will he follow through on the mission that God has sent him for? Will he seek to circumvent the way of the cross, or will he go? Will he do that which he came to do in the first place? He's going to settle that now, and he feels the weight of that to the point that he's grieved in his spirit, and so much so that, the suggestion here is that this is one of those crossroad kind of moments. A decision must be made, and the course that one chooses will impact eternity. The phrasing that Jesus uses here utilizes some of those words that we find even in the Old Testament. And it echoes in some ways that refrain from Psalms 42 and 43. If you're familiar there, at several points in those Psalms you get this refrain that says, "Why are you downcast, O my soul? Why so disturbed within me?" This description of grief that is so overwhelming that it could kill me. Maybe you've been in one of those moments. But that gives us a sense that the decision that Jesus is settling here is not a decision about what menu item I'm going to have for dinner. Difficult as that decision may be at times. If you're at a restaurant that has a menu with all kinds of choices that you love and you're experiencing what I like to call menu anxiety, we're not talking about that kind of simple decision. This is a biggie. This is the one that is going to shape the course of eternity for the entire world, and Jesus has to decide what he's going to do with that. I don't know about you, but when I face those crossroad moments in my life, I find myself tending to withdraw from being around other people. I find myself wanting to escape and to be alone. And some of that's my personality. Some of that is the the introvert part of me that processes some of those kind of things in solitude. But I think we set ourselves up with a greater level of vulnerability to do the wrong thing or to make the unwise choice if we isolate ourselves from others. Because one of the things that we learn from Jesus in observing him in this moment in the garden is that Jesus faces this crossroad moment in his life with the support of his friends. Jesus takes his disciples along to be there to support him in prayer in this difficult moment. We read it a few moments ago in verses 36 and 37. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And he took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him. And then if we read on in there, we find that not only did he take kind of those three, those who were closest to him in terms of friendship on a bit farther, but then Jesus went farther yet from them, perhaps not out of eyesight, perhaps not beyond even where they could hear the groans in his prayers, but kind of by himself. So there's this interesting combination of kind of solitude and yet the support and the encouragement of friends. We know that the place where they went there, the Garden of Gethsemane, a word meaning olive press, and most likely a place where there was an olive grove there, was a place that Jesus and his disciples were familiar with. In fact, John tells us in John chapter 18 that on the other side of the Mount of Olives there was a grove, and he and his disciples went into it, and Judas, who would betray him, knew the place because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. In this crossroad moment where Jesus is settling the choice that will determine the climactic, mission-fulfilling part of his ministry, Jesus takes along his disciples for prayer support and friendship and the fellowship that is there. He doesn't go sit by himself in some place far and detached from others, but Jesus brings along, he seeks the support and the encouragement of his friends in that moment. I've become firmly convinced, my friend, that one of the great tools of the enemy is to leave us in these significant moments where we're trying to settle difficult decisions, to leave us feeling isolated and detached and aloof from others, to feel as if we're all by ourselves and no one has ever faced this decision before in their lives and we have nothing to learn from someone else. So we don't have that support. But when the enemy gets us in that kind of isolation, then he's able to find us at our point of greatest vulnerability. Jesus didn't allow that to happen. Jesus certainly prayed by himself in this moment, but he did so within the context of the support and the encouragement of his friends. And even if in those crossroad moments of our lives, we bring our friends around us to do nothing more than pray, which is exactly what Jesus asked his disciples to do here, we have that much greater strength in facing those kind of decisions. Jesus said, I want you guys to come along and I want you to pray. And we do well in those crossroad moments of our lives to seek the help of our friends, if for nothing else than to say, would you pray? Would you help me pray about this agonizing, difficult, significant, hugely impacting decision that I need to make about my life? Face the moment with the support of our friends. Now, Jesus also invests in this moment in earnest prayer. The picture, in fact, we get of Jesus praying here is a powerful image of the wrestling with what's going on in his life here. We read there in verse 39 that going a bit farther, he brought along the 11, and then of those he brought 3, James and John and Peter, along a little farther. And then Jesus goes a little farther himself, and he fell with his face down to the ground, and he prayed, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will. Now, the picture that we get of Jesus' prayer here is not what I would call the quickie. Hey, Lord, if you could kind of take care of this, that'd be great. Thanks. Check in later. What we get in this moment is that picture of a deep investment in prayer. Much the same way that matches the level of sorrow and grief that seemed to define Jesus' kind of mood coming into to this moment. But it's not a trivial moment of prayer. In fact, if we take seriously what's in the text here, that first moment of prayer that Jesus shares as he goes on a little farther from James and John and Peter is probably about an hour. And we're told there, the picture is that Jesus fell with his face on the ground. He was prostrate before God and earnestly pouring out his heart there for an hour. Because we're told when he comes back, in verse 40, he returned to his disciples and he found them sleeping. Could you men not keep watch with me for 1 hour? He asked Peter. So for an hour, Jesus is in an agonizing way pouring out his heart in prayer for God. The disciples back there, they fall asleep. But this is not just Jesus saying, hey, Lord, it'd be nice if we could avoid this. You know, it's looking a little unpleasant. Thanks. Anything you can do would be great. Checking out. But Jesus falls on the ground and he pours out his heart to God. This is something I would love to avoid, Lord, if there's any way. But nonetheless, if this is what you want, then let's do it. I'll go with you. And then we're told, after he comes back and he kind of reprimands the disciples for sleeping, we're told that he goes back a second time and he prays. And we're given the content of that. Verse 42, he went away a second time and he prayed, my Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done. And then he comes back and he finds the disciples still sleeping. And we're told there in verse 43 that he leaves them again and he goes away once more and he prays the third time, saying the same thing. Now, I don't know what your life is like. I don't know the decisions that you've had to make. I don't know kind of what kind of time and effort you invest in prayer. But I can speak for myself, and there have been moments in my life when I've been faced with significant decisions, and I haven't exactly invested in the level of prayer that we certainly see reflected in Jesus' moment in the garden here. In fact, I'm pretty convinced that in the American church, we often shoot past that whole prayer thing. We often fail to really invest ourselves in that. We're doers, and there's some benefit, to be sure, in doing and taking the next steps, and we'll talk about that. But often, whether it's at the level of a church or at the level of myself and my own life and the decision that I'm making, we've often failed to really invest the kind of energy, the kind of wholehearted devotion that Jesus does here to a life of prayer seeking God's help and God's direction and God's wisdom. Jesus invests incredibly in earnest prayer. And I would challenge you, as you face those crossroad moments in your life, are you willing? Are you willing to invest in the earnest prayer that will help settle those decisions in a way that invests in eternity?